good afternoon. My name is Phillip from Bossche, and it's a great honor to be able to be here today, to have seen your exhibition, Brian, to talk with you. So we'll talk in English, but for sure, if you have questions, n'hésitez pas de poser des questions en français, je peux les traduire à l'artiste. So the idea is that we talk about this exhibition, or we start walking around a little bit into your world of painting and paintings, but especially to go and look at the exhibition, the first exhibition that you made here in Paris, your first solo exhibition in Paris. I'm sitting here just because we curated an exhibition together with Eric Troncy, et le consortium that was last year, and that exhibition traveled both from Dijon to Ostende. End of Messages was the title of that exhibition, and yeah, I think I want to start with my first question is, I entered yesterday and I didn't have the time to look it up, but I saw the title of your exhibition here, Hours. In French, or here in Europe, we think about les très belles heures, the most beautiful hours. Where is that title coming from?
I don't know, it just, it's somewhat intuitive, but I like to have a title. It feels kind of a nice poetic unification of the work when it's finished. And I think to me it's just the sense, I like the idea of the paintings being outside of time, but also feeling like condensed time on some level. So hours just felt right. And also thinking of like book of hours, I like the pun of it. And one of my early shows when I first moved to Los Angeles, I think my first show there was called Days, which I think was somewhat related, and I just realized the repetitive act of painting, and so somehow this felt, maybe the time has gotten a little fatter, but it's still just a present block of time.
Because my first thought was that the hours was also the hours spending in the studio, the hours being in front of that canvas.
Yeah, you're not wrong.
But we'll come back to that. I think you could see that the exhibition brings three types of works, you could say, three different chapters in the exhibition. I think there's the main exhibition space, and I propose to start over there and then go to the seascapes, if I can call them that way.
Yeah, you can.
But also there, maybe we come back to that.
Yeah.
Then end here in this room. What I remember from the exhibition we did together in Ostende is that at some point I saw a very young boy, I think he was 16 or 17, and he spent like more than 1 hour in the exhibition, and I saw him going very close to paintings and sometimes taking distance. By saying this, I want to start a conversation about, I think, first the formal aspects of your painting, because I think that's something very important for you.
Mm-hmm. In what sense, the formal? I mean, it is important to me, but...
Thinking about composition, thinking about scale or dimension.
Yeah, I mean, on some level I feel I get so inside them that it's hard to even, like, on some level that's all I'm thinking about is some balance of, I mean, it's very abstract and formal on some level to this balancing of color, composition, cropping, and for me to be interested in making a painting, the reason I use images is without an image I find all of those same ways of making a painting start to feel on a personal level for me, I just lose interest. And so on some level the image is the complication that then I have to, naturally I start to kind of chew on it and have to in some way solve, and also to make it interesting to myself, because I'm not interested in making representational painting or illusionistic painting. It's more that I like the idea of taking a history of figuration and then seeing, kind of getting on the inside of it, and I don't know, taking it to some other, I guess, idiosyncratic place. And the longer I've done that, the more I found a place there that feels natural to me, and it feels, over the years and the hours, it started to feel more unique to me. And I guess whatever, you have these cliches of what you would call that, finding your voice or whatever, but at a certain point, there's like a feedback loop, and once I got in there, you realize, both sometimes with this compression of repetition, making the same image again and seeing what kind of dissonance or resonance there is, and then sometimes, of course, just to blow it all out and make something new. But so the formal aspects keep me away from, like, I'm not interested in particularly creating narratives or telling stories with painting. I think when I first started, that was slightly interesting, but over time I realized that's what felt like radically freeing to me, is to not try to tell a story. So,
if you talk about the history of images, I think you talk about your own history of images.
Mm-hmm.
Am I right that you started painting around 1990? Or?
Yeah.
Yes.
Pretty much exactly. I mean, I was definitely one of those kids who grew up drawing all the time, but it was, drawing from Mad Magazine and all the kind of usual suspects, or just drawing, I don't know, anything. A lot of drawing, like Charlie Brown and things like that, when I was really small, just because I liked those shapes. And it really was only when I was at university that I kind of really started to realize that people still made paintings. I mean, I always think it sounds completely ignorant, but I just didn't, it just didn't really cross my mind. I mean, I knew, of course, like Warhol, and at the time, I guess this would have been in the 80s, Basquiat and these things, but it still felt really remote from my life. And when I was at university, I think one of the first things that changed that was, like, I was at Berkeley, and they have a very small collection in their museum, but the first time I saw a Phillip painting, it just was, so resonant and alive and kind of dirty in a way that made me think, like, I think I want to paint. And then once I started painting, I just was like, I think this is all I want to do.
And I think when I walk through that main space and I see your paintings over there, I'm pretty sure that during those hours of painting, you don't think about the word portrait or the word landscape. Because for me as a viewer, one of your portraits or figurative representationals could be like landscape, or sometimes in the portrait there is one or two or three different landscapes.
Yeah. I don't really think about anything much while I'm painting. I mean, luckily this has been something, after a while I realize it really has freed me from much conscious thinking, and so it does feel more like a kind of meditative act. And there are times, of course, where you think about it, but anytime I think more about an idea, it's usually related to, I'm at home, I'm not painting, someone sends an email and there's like a deadline, and there's a stress of like, maybe I can think about something and make it happen, but then usually I kind of try to just dismiss that and wait till I get back in the studio the next morning and and just start something new. And if it doesn't, I really like to just start painting, and if it goes pear-shaped or bad, just let it become something else. And that's one reason I use a lot of repetition, is to try to kind of bypass too much, clever thinking.
I think what I like personally about your paintings is that when I see your paintings, they make me think about painting, and I can't use my historical background, so they make me think about the painting that I don't know, in a way. And if I'm right, I think in one of your texts, or text that has been written about your work, there is this quote about painting being a bad idea. Is painting a bad idea?
I don't know. I think a lot of the times it is. It's certainly at this point, I think, one of the things I like about painting. Obviously this whole notion of painting is dead has been, something said since at least mid-19th century, and it's just, if it's an absurd thing to have ever said, and it continues to be so, but for me that part has always felt really liberating, and because I do feel like working in an art form that's as old as really human consciousness, and then at the same time something that is not particularly at the top of anyone's mind as far as
media.
It's not like people think they want entertainment. Most people let's turn to painting to see what's and so that creates, I guess that can be a bad idea, because it's a hard place to get attention if you want attention, and I don't think it's not a very likely place to make your occupation. But at the same time, for me, that kind of degraded space adds a lot of freedom.
Yeah, what I mean with a bad idea personally is that you mentioned Phillip, and I think we all know Phillip first was painting in an abstract way. One of his best friends, Morton Feldman, blah 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 blah, and then Morton Feldman starts painting in a complete other way. Painting as a bad idea, I would say, and really, it gets really, it's the end of the friendship with his best friend, Morton Feldman, but it goes on. Okay, we're not going to talk about Morton Feldman or Phillip Guston here, but I think thinking about painting as a bad idea is to do also it's 2016 we're talking about. We're living today, you are an image maker, but at the same time we are image makers because we use our phone to make a lot of images. Yesterday at the opening I saw a lot of people taking. I'm doing the same when I entered here 15 minutes ago. I think that's a reference as an artist you have to deal with, I would say.
Wait, which reference? People taking pictures, or just the fact that everyone is kind of image-ridden?
Yes,
at this point?
that point.
Yeah, I think that's true, and certainly for me, one of the things, again, that I like about painting is, and one thing I try to do in my painting is slow that down, to create images. I've said it, I know I've said this before, but I really feel pretty ambivalent a lot of the time about my actual imagery, but it is my imagery. It's not what I set out as a life goal, was to kind of create these creatures, but on some level, that is, if you give in to something that's intuitive and natural, you may end up in a place that feels, sometimes it feels somewhat compromised, and yet I realize that kind of excites me. And the fact that these are not for everyone, and that some people find them garish or stupid or something, I like that space. It's like a Trojan horse to really move into the middle of something and yet like painting. If the fact that that my paintings that aren't doing anything radical or offensive can still get under people's skin or cause people to argue, for me, I mean, it's kind of adolescent, but I find that exciting.
I think they're radical, yes. Okay, maybe just being curious. I think I never asked you the question, but okay, you're sitting in your studio for hours. You paint both with oil paint and acrylic paint. So you're working on different paintings at the same time? Or
no,
can
usually,
you tell something about that?
Yeah, usually that's something that's like more almost like a chunk of a year. Like, when something starts to feel, sometimes you just get to this point where, like, right now for a while I feel very fluid in the studio, and things have been kind of, they feel easy, and yet sometimes then it's amazing how fast it's almost like you're driving along and then you hit a wall, and at that point everything just feels off and out of balance, and you deal with all the usual probably vulnerabilities that artists deal with. Am I out of ideas? And so rather than sometimes trying to think of a big new idea or make a huge new body of work, which I think some artists are very adept at. Like for me, that tends to be really, really simple. Like, changing to oil, start painting in oil, or like certainly starting to deal with sand, or at a certain. It changes always over time, but it's kind of like I remember after having my first few shows in the early 2000s and things, I think at this point it was because it was the first time I had attention and people liked it, and that was, of course, felt good, but then it was the first time I was ever self-conscious, because before that I was making these paintings and no one cared. So I remember having a few shows and then actually having a show with Tommaso in London, and there were every figure was turned away, so there were no faces, no eyes, no mouths. And it was the first time I did some seascapes, and it was just, I had to I still, like I said, for me, I used the image, but I think that was the first time of kind of feeling this, letting everything turn away. And on some level, it was like the paintings, for me, I needed the paintings to be disinterested in everyone who was interested in them. And I over time I realized, I think this was just, I didn't know how to work with people paying attention. And once I kind of came to that realization, I think it became something else. But now those same kind of feelings tend to be like, I need problems to come up with new ideas. For the work to breathe and change, I like to just kind of throw things in there. So it's more that I'll start working in oils, like at some point, I think 2009, I remember I had a show in New York, and immediately after, like literally while I was still there, and my wife was very sick in a hotel, and somehow this whole thing just felt bad, and I literally just thought, okay, I'm gonna go back to painting with oils, which always has felt harder for me.
And this has to do with?
It has to do with, I mean, on some level, for me, I think it's that I developed a way of thinking that's very quick and thin, and I like to be able to do a lot of thin layers in a day, and you can't really do that. So, but then that's what I realized, it's forcing myself to figure out, well, how would you translate that, I guess? And then something new happens, and every time there's this kind of ineffable quality that I'm trying to get of something that resonates, which is the only way I know how to end a painting. Like the painting is going to speak to whoever's looking at it without me. And so sometimes I need it to be harder to get to that place, I guess. just to give myself like sustenance, or maybe it's like sadistic, or I don't know.
Here in the exhibition, you really have like those three, I call them chapters or whatever, three kind of waves, sound waves maybe. And it has to do with technique also, like you were saying, like there you're using sand in your seascapes, here mouthful, you use a canvas, unprepared canvas, I think. Yes. So these are choices. Yeah, maybe let's talk about mouthful.
Yeah, well, these I made a few before these, maybe a year and a half ago. I was kind of curious after, I would say earlier in, if we're calling them portraits, the figures, I was always more attuned to the eyes as kind of something that can convey a soul, or it's kind of cliche, but this notion of the eyes as being an interior, our passage through from like the outside world to the inside world. And I like this kind of trying to make these iconic, simplistic ways of kind of dealing both with that and reflections. And when I do that, I would also had a kind of perverse interest in like mouths at that point for me, where I was kind of more and more like, can you make this kind of oblong shape and then just put a line through it, which is a little more similar to that first one, but even that one's a lot more detailed than, but over time I started to just think kind of in this way of creating a problem was, could I create the sense of, for me, a person being inside there, or a personality through the mouth more, or through these details of teeth, gaps, tongues, or light hitting a lip, or and
it's a still life here.
Yeah, and the thing is, I guess I was curious when I made these big, pretty large ones, more like the large is size than that, and then like one of the first ones I did that I really loved is really tall, like not as high as that wall, but it would fit nicely in there. But so they were vertical lips, and I just kept thinking like, how much can you push this and still retain something that to me feels like that connection that can be unique in representations of another human, this dumb desire we have to like resonate with an image of, of a human. And then to see like how much can you strip away and still retain that. And so these ended up being, I think, for me, a logical, it's like on some level the lips read as an icon on just almost printed on the linen. But then what I wanted to do was try to, rather than having that say be the Rolling Stones kind of logo, even though on some level one may think of that, is have something that feels more uniquely like separate people or stand-ins, and then just a painting. I mean, like you said earlier, I agree. I mean, especially like some of these, or a lot of the ones where there's the tongue, like when I make those, I feel the same as not these seascapes, but the seascapes that I made, like the ones that were in the show we made together. I feel kind of like I'm making the seascapes when I'm making that. I mean, this kind of figuring out how much you need to put in to make it a unique sense of something that could exist, and how far you can push it towards abstraction, I guess.
Yes, but you push it towards abstraction. Mm-hmm. That's one direction, but I think the other direction is you bring in more and more complexity in that abstraction, in that on the floss or whatever the gloss on the lips, and and it becomes a painting in a painting. Or
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I don't, on a personal level, like I'm so much more interested in living within the idea of abstraction abstracting anything than I am with some notion of trying to reach a notion of like pure abstraction. Because to me at that point, it would feel, I would feel closed out, where somehow the complexity of it is, I don't know, it's like my lifeblood. And it may change. Like, it's funny when you bring up this story, like the Morton Feldman, and this notion of Guston, and I know he said that, where it's like, I believe it was, and on some level he said it was during like the Vietnam War that he was watching these things on the television and then going to a studio, and I think, said he was adjusting gray to blue to pink, and finally it got to the point where that just didn't do it for him. And it's not, to me, I don't really have a hierarchy when I look at other painters, but in my own sense of it, like that is, I need it to be kind of complicated and a little, I don't know.
am I pushing it too far to think that being from Europe myself, but in America, having had like a generation of abstract expressionists making bigger and bigger and biggest abstract paintings, after that something else had to come that would break that tradition in a way. Is that part of it? Is that
Yeah, I think it is without a lot of consciousness. But I mean, certainly if I think back to being a kid of the 80s, 90s, and especially actually starting to be an artist in the 90s, and I mean, I don't know about Europe, but it certainly, you didn't think you were going to make a living or do it. I mean, there was such a pit, and this was after the kind of big 80s boom, and I knew I didn't want to do that. And I mean, I feel like this was also the era of, like post-it note art and scatter art, and that all made sense to me, of just kind
or
of...
just the first computer games, Pong. It's like the most abstract painting I ever saw.
Yeah,
and it's interactive at the same time.
Yeah.
It's like your lips in a way.
Yeah. Now you've gone too far.
Yes, I know. But okay, I think I heard you say something yesterday, and okay, we here in Europe, and I think someone did already, a colleague of mine mentioned Phillip with your seascapes. But I think you went to the Mu.ZEE d'Orsay yesterday, or this week?
I did not go this week, but I did go I did go recently.
So let's say you went to the Mu.ZEE d'Orsay yesterday.
Okay. Now I like this.
Okay.
Hypotheticals.
What painting or what section would have interested you more than others?
Well, Manet, probably first and always, like that. I mean, that's another person that, for me, starting to paint, that you don't see a Manet painting that doesn't do it for me. I mean, they're just always, and certainly, I mean, early on, Cézanne, and of course, Courbet, and I mean, Origin of the World is still one of the most, like, crazy paintings, for the fact that some people find it completely offensive and some people find it, radically moving. And to me, that sense of, like, again, what a painting can do, and every now and then an artist makes something that just will never sit still, it'll never behave. even though we all understand intellectually, this painting was made, it was finished, it isn't moving anymore. When you look away, nothing is happening. It's not a television, it's not a computer screen, but you cannot look at it and have that, truly believe that. So to me, like that looking at Manet and like déjeuner sous l'herbe, or, you know, pardon the pronunciation, but I mean, this sense of a disjointed image holding together is so radical to me as a goal, and so on some level, like that kind of mid-19th century to me still feels, I mean, this is the thing that can depress me sometimes about if I'm needing to talk too much about contemporary painting, is because I think every time and every generation has a narcissistic sense that the fact that we still constantly believe in progress, both politically and, you know, all of these things, technologically, and so often we're seeing these trends that go back and forth, you know, every 5 years, the return of figuration, the return of abstraction, and, you know, every now and then it's 10 years, and it's really market driven, and all, you know, there are all these other artists who are always doing something, so it's just more like, what am I paying attention to? And meanwhile, you go to d'Orsay and, you know, go see any of these paintings, and they're just still doing this, like, insane thing today.
Yeah, but this is also the discussion that actually every painting is a contemporary painting, or every artwork is a contemporary artwork. If I'm watching at the hand of Manet coming out of the beautiful dress of his mistress, that's as radical as some of your paintings here. And I think you mentioned that already a few times, and I think it's true also that making an exhibition together, I witnessed people like going and looking at the paintings for 1 hour and a half, but also at like one very radical negative person telling me like, this can't.
And music is an incredibly strong influencer of how we, again, because I think sometimes we trust our eyes more than all these other senses that take things in. So if you're seeing something but there's minor key music playing and you're like, oh, that's so sad, you know, things. But I guess what I mean when I think of it is, it's that for me, music and painting are two things that can bypass like language barriers. So people can listen to a music, and even if you don't understand the words, you can get the feeling. And maybe the words aren't important, because often the words aren't important even if you do understand them. Sometimes they are. But you can still have a strong feeling with words that then when you read them on the page, it's like, oh yeah, that doesn't actually make me feel anything reading them. But the music will do that. And I think painting also has a way of bypassing this language barrier where, for me, I don't feel overly articulate. I don't really like to write that much. And so it's amazing that I can make these paintings that have a lot of, I don't know, my inner thoughts embedded in them, and send them off to anyone. And now that we live in a global world, it's like, you know, sometimes I do get communications from people, and, you know, to think that an image can just bypass is something that I guess that's the part of it why I say I don't see them as opposed, because I think they have these unique powers, like where language can often become such a difficult barrier to get past.
Okay. I would say thank you for your words, for your explanations. Je ne sais pas s'il y a des questions. Are there questions? Please feel free to talk with Brian. And for sure, go and see the paintings. But thank you.
Thank you.